a client is most likely not absorbing a definition that we give them live anyway, because people fake understanding. Like, that's human nature. So when
Yes, I'm married. I know.
when you're in a meeting with them and they're nodding their head, they're lying. Come on, they're lying most of the time.
Right.
Sometimes they're absorbing some of it, but it would be the same for me if I were going to visit with a scientist and he's trying to explain something to me that's new. I'm going to catch like something here and there, but I'm not really going to truly absorb it like I could if I could hear him when I'm in private and I don't have to worry if he thinks I'm an idiot or, if my hair looks weird or whatever it is people worry about when they're sitting across the table from each other. When you can absorb something when you're just sitting at your desk by yourself, the difference is pretty vast.
Do clients need to understand the process, terminology, and documents we're creating for them? Of course they do, and clients are much happier and less stressed when they understand what's going on. And, as a bonus, they appreciate us and the value we bring to their situation. But how do we make it easier to explain and translate the specific information they need to know? This week, we're joined by Tiffany Christianson, a corporate law attorney who had clients who didn't always understand everything she did for them. Getting clients educated to make better decisions wasn't always easy. So she created a tool for attorneys to explain documents to their clients through secured screen recordings. It's now available as DocuPlayer. Tiffany is an emerging expert on attorney-client communication, challenging attorneys to demystify the law for clients to make our advice more useful to them, and make the experience of practicing law more rewarding for attorneys. We discuss how we can explain the primary pieces of our work in plain English to enable client understanding. We don't have to give a full legal education to take the mystery out for our clients. Clients just need to understand the nuts and bolts of the narrow slice of law that applies to their situation. This ultimately saves tons of time on both ends, clears up confusion for our clients, and leads to a happier, less stressed client relationship. Let's get to the interview. I'm John Strohmeyer, and this is the 5-Star Counsel Podcast. The market for legal services is shifting, and lawyers who don't adapt will be left behind. This podcast gives you a competitive edge in today's market by sharing the client service lessons you probably didn't learn in law school or in law practice. Let's start the show. This episode of 5-Star Counsel is sponsored by TextExpander. Supercharge your team with the power of TextExpander. Now, I've been using TextExpander for years, and it's a huge help. I save hours every week by using the snippets to consistently generate pre-written text for communications. This saves me from being lashed to the keyboard, coming up with the right words, and then typing them correctly. I've typed it correctly once, so it's ready whenever I type the short abbreviation I chose. TextExpander does the rest of the typing for me. Now, I started using text replacement years ago to streamline and speed up my time entry. I had a few snippets that included most of the words that I needed for any entry. I'd enter that snippet and then delete the words I didn't need. The best part was not having to type the same phrases over and over again. Telephone conference with, office conference with, preparation for same, and on and on and on. I'm sure you've got the same stock phrases that you can type blindfolded and don't care to ever think about again. Ultimately, it means you can do more with the same resources. Less repetition, fewer errors, and greater consistency. TextExpander is available on Mac, Windows, Chrome, iPhone, and iPad, so you can use your snippets across your programs and platforms. For example, I can respond to a LinkedIn message on my phone, iPad, or desktop with one Calendly link, and all I have to remember is my custom abbreviation. 5-Star counselors can get 20% off their first year by following the link in the show notes or heading to 5starcounsel.com/textexpander. Hey, Tiffany, thanks for being here today.
Thank you so much for having me. I love the topics that you talk about, so I'm excited.
Oh, thank you. Well, to give our dear listeners some background, you and I met on LinkedIn because you've got a neat product that I thought we started using, slowly rolling it out in my own firm, where you help clients understand the nasty morass of documents that we dump on them, and it helps walk people through what they're potentially being asked to sign. And what I really liked about it is it's all about how do we make it easier for the clients to understand what they're doing. So, there's a lot to talk about, and rather than try and explain exactly what DocuPlayer is, I'm going to hand it over to you to kind of give us some background on how you got to where we are now.
Yeah, so I've been practicing in corporate law for about 16 years, and most of my clients are pretty savvy business people. And so, like most attorneys, I assume that when I send them an email and a Word document, they get back to me with a couple questions. I think, okay, they understand it relatively well. And I had a client at one point who was an artist, so kind of like the antithesis of my typical client. And he really needed a super complex IP document. He could never understand it. And I thought, this poor guy is going to be lost and he's going to call me 45 times. And I don't really have the time for these 45 phone calls. So I just kind of patched something together and sent it to him in a screen recording and said, hey, let me know how this works. And so I didn't think anything else about it. And he texted me the next day and said, this is amazing. He was watching it right then and he could rewind it and rewatch it when he needed to. So I mentioned it to a friend who's an attorney, and he said, well, great. Now we're all going to have to use that. And I thought, oh, haha, funny. So a couple weeks later, I used it. I had some clients we were negotiating a settlement agreement for. So I used it for them. And so we've been on, I don't know how many rounds of red lines. So they've been through this process numerous times. And I sent them a DocuPlayer with one. And they immediately wrote back and said, hey, thanks for doing that. Can you do that every time? Because we understand it so much better. And that it sort of surprised me. So I just kept using it more and more. And then I decided to turn it into a platform so other attorneys could use it. But I really have developed this passion for how attorneys communicate, because when we communicate well, the client experience, I found, is so much better, because they're really sort of like starving for something like that. And, they hesitate to call because they know it's going to cost them more. Or even if it's not about money, to some extent, they think, well, I'm never going to retain this anyway, so it doesn't really matter how many times I ask. And then the other thing that surprised me is that it lowers stress for me as I started using it, because when clients understand what you're doing, they understand what they're paying for, they appreciate you more. So it was just kind of all of those things, and my throwing spaghetti against the wall as an experiment led me to think, I really think this could be useful for a lot of attorneys out there.
Yeah, and it gets to something that I listen to a lot of podcasts on small businesses just to get ideas and thoughts about how to do things outside of law. So what comes up again and again is so many products get started just by scratching your own itch. You had this itch, you saw that it was there, and yes, you could do just a Zoom recording and send it to somebody, but there's not a good way to protect it when you send it to them, because otherwise you're going to have to either set up some back end where you upload it, let's just say you easily get your video into Dropbox and send the client a link to Dropbox. You're hoping that they can download a player, either have the player most likely on their phone, and then, assume that they're going to download the 35 or 40 meg video and watch it there, and then remember, oh, I've got to go look here. And the reality is it's just, it's unlikely to happen.
Right. It's just a little clunky, and the more steps there are, the more hurdles. And then maybe they think, oh, I'm not going to go through those hurdles to do this because I don't even know what it is. So we made it easy with a link and a password, and there's other features. You can sort by client and things like that. But there's disclaimers. So it's legally targeted. There's other screen recorders out there, but some of them proactively publish your videos like YouTube. So that's obviously not what we're looking for.
Here's our secret formula. Make sure you sign here.
Yeah, here's what we're concerned about.
Right. And ultimately, though, our job is to communicate very complicated things to clients. And it doesn't matter, here I've been practicing for over a decade. The stuff that I have learned and absorbed and just know as basic information in my practice area, it's true for just about everybody who's a lawyer. There's just the basics that you now have.
Foundation.
Right. So, ultimately what we're looking at is, what can we do to better educate clients?
Yeah, I think what's interesting about this is it really is about turning what we do a little bit inside out, because we tend to think, I think law school kind of programs us, okay, you're the lawyer, you're like the center of this little universe. And when you don't even talk about clients in law school. So there's this book that I've read, I wish I could pull the name out of my head right now, but this great woman that teaches this communication component in law school. And she started teaching it because in one of her classes, she said, okay, well, how would you explain this part of the estate plan to your client? And her student goes, who? She's like, oh my goodness, we got to do something about this. So I started researching and reading a lot of things about just that topic itself, thinking, hey, there's a client at the end of this thing that we're doing. It's not just us in a vacuum. And if we think about who is this person and make it a little more person-centered than, analysis-centered, because we're going to do that anyway when we're sitting at our desks alone, then the way we deliver what we're doing is going to be different. You're going to, if you think about what's your client's personality and maybe even ask them some questions on your intake form about if they're visual or an audio learner and, a few things to get to know how they absorb information. All you have to teach them is this little slice. They don't need, and they're not going to get from you this full law school education. They need one little slice. And if they can understand that, how much better a service is that? I mean, it's really tremendous.
Right. I really like that because what you're saying, what I think lawyers commonly misunderstand is we need them to know the full range of the law on whatever we're helping them with. And the reality is they don't have the time or the patience or even the bandwidth in most cases to become even journeyman status
right.
when it comes to this area of the law. Like, for my practice in estate planning, I don't need people to be worried about, well, if we sign it this way, maybe it'll work. It really is. Here are the reasonable options. Let me break it down. Like, let's figure out what works here. And every particular client will have their own little nuances that maybe there's an option for the Smiths that isn't an option for the Joneses. But again, looking at how do we kind of carve out enough education for clients to make it easy for them.
There's this lack of just giving them some basics. So it's akin to me going to my CPA because God help me, I can never understand what they're saying truly like I need to. And I'm like, okay, yes, I'm talking to you. I totally get it. I go back to tell my business partner and I'm like, I thought that I knew what he was saying, but I've completely forgotten. And clients do the same thing. So if they need to tell their spouse, like relay a conversation they had or their business partner, it sort of gets really muddy, like the telephone game. That ended up being another benefit of DocuPlayer that I didn't really see coming either because I just wasn't thinking about it. So if somebody's going to share it with their whomever, their spouse or business partner, then they just send them the recording, which they're not going to have, they didn't have that tool otherwise. So they don't have to try to remember and relay it, then lose things in translation, which certainly happens. And I've seen it with my business clients when it's one department to another.
Tiffany, what are some of the common pitfalls? I mean, obviously we've got the ability to share something and now you're telling people once, but you're telling multiple people one time at different times. What are some of the ways that we can get led astray? What are some of the pitfalls involved in really educating clients?
The pitfalls in educating clients. Well, I think we're already experiencing that because I think we just generally as an industry do it sort of poorly. So the pitfalls of doing it poorly are, I think of a common litigator complaint, which is, okay, I send this discovery request to a client in order to send back, all their documents that are relevant, all the information that's relevant. And then they omit something super key. And then they give it to me 6 months later. And why in the world didn't they give it to me when I needed it? Because now I'm in a kind of between a rock and a hard place on this particular argument I needed to make. Whereas if I'd had it timely, our case would have been stronger. Well, the client didn't give it to you because they didn't understand what you were asking for. That's really the pivotal thing. They didn't have the tools in their belt to do that. So if we can, by educating them more than we already do, I don't think we're going to have any more pitfalls than we already do. I think we're going to start knocking out the gopher heads and experience fewer issues like the untimely information sharing. Oh, I forgot to tell you that. Are you kidding me? You didn't tell me that a year ago. But they didn't know. They didn't know it was relevant.
So, Tiffany, we're going through a lot of things. Looking back over where you've come with all of this, what's one thing you wish you'd known when you'd gotten started that would have made all of this easier?
So I always love that question because there's so much to learn in business. There's a few things I learned in some other businesses that I started. I had totally randomly, I started the stroller shade company when my kids were babies, and I still have it, and it's still there if I decide to go back to it. But I learned at that point, manufacturing things is super hard because you have to create all this tangible stuff. And then I have another baby that will hatch at some point along the way that's with another attorney that has to do with contracts online. So that didn't have the physical component, but there's still a lot of work to do on the back end. And then with DocuPlayer, which is, occupies a tremendous amount of my time, and it's something I'll be into for the foreseeable future. I've refined some processes through those other experiences. One of the things I'm really thankful that I did do is I've seen a lot of clients waste really a tremendous amount of money on developers. So you can pay 200 grand to a developer and then realize you still have nothing at the end of that. And I used this company called TopTal it's a platform that matches you with top developer talent. So that was really key for me, because if I hadn't known about them, I'm not sure where I would have started. The thing I wish I had known this go round is it's going to cost a lot more and it's going to take a lot longer than I thought that it would, which I should have known. Like, everyone says that. I knew it from other things, but you get so excited about a new idea that you're like, oh, no, this is going to be, it's going to be easy. I'm going to have it up in 3 months and there's going to be people coming out of the woodwork wanting to use it because they see what I see.
Right. And I mean, I think it gets to something we talk about a lot here is this is not something that, even though you were able to stitch together the basic product, when it came time to really get it out there, you weren't the one tweaking code.
I definitely was not. So I've got a lot of vision. So it's easy for me to lead from a visionary capacity. And I've got a great team that I work with to make it real. And then I'm pretty choosy about who I work with in terms of marketing and things like that, so that I keep it cost effective. And also people who understand the legal industry. That's pretty important to me because, we have to speak in the right voice when we're talking to attorneys. It can't sound like, a toy commercial, or it just has to be in a certain tone and using certain language. So that's one thing that I'm really careful about. But yeah, having the right team will make or break any business.
Tiffany, we're start winding down here. What's one practical thing listeners can do right now to get started in better educating their clients?
There's so many things from a communication standpoint that we can easily do. And one of them we talked about a little bit ago was adding some questions to the client intake that kind of cut to who that client is. But in that same phase of an engagement, to give a client a list of basic terms that are relevant to the practice area that you're delivering the service for can be pretty game changing, because we take all these terms for granted, like what's discovery, what's a deposition, what's a motion to dismiss. Whereas for clients, that is like Latin, jargon coming at them. It sounds totally foreign. So a list of common terms for the industry or the practice area that you're delivering services in, it's easy. You could probably crank it out in 20 minutes and, give it to a client every single time, every client that comes in for that practice area. And it really can improve that client's experience.
Yeah, and that's something I started doing a few years ago, and with my estate planning clients, where I told them up front, here, this is, 7 to 10 pages of homework, and calling it homework, and telling them, look, if you read this, our first meeting will be an hour and a half to 2 hours, and it's mostly us talking through things and making bigger decisions. If you don't read it, well, it'll be at least 2.5 hours, and it's a lot more of me lecturing you about what everything means and explaining all of it. So you could, spend the 10 minutes reading 10 pages or have the extra half hour on the meeting. I'll have either meeting, but I have found pretty universally clients, when you frame it up as you can spend less time with me, you can go do anything else. As entertaining as I try and be in those meetings, making sure that they have that education up front, it saves, saves me the time of, okay, well, I don't have to, I don't have to go through the same terms over and over, because I'm sure you've gotten this too of, all right, well, discovery is the process where whatever discovery is, because I'm not a litigator, right. But, it's like not having to explain what an executor is anymore. Yeah. And even after 5 years of doing those in meetings, it got dull for me. And I knew that I was, phoning it in. The clients could probably pick up on the fact that I was, kind of, we're saying this again and again for the umpteenth time. That's
Yeah.
not good for them. But if we can make it easier for them, whether it's through the glossary or videos where they can see, oh, okay, well, this is what he's talking about, and
Yeah.
they can get that information on their own terms, that just helps.
It does. And a client is most likely not absorbing a definition that we give them live anyway, because people fake understanding. Like, that's human nature. So when
Yes, I'm
you're
married. I know.
when you're in a meeting with them and they're nodding their head, they're lying. Come on, they're lying most of the
Right.
time. Sometimes they're absorbing some of it, but it would be the same for me if I were going to visit with a scientist and he's trying to explain something to me that's new. I'm going to catch like something here and there, but I'm not really going to truly absorb it like I could if I could hear him when I'm in private and I don't have to worry if he thinks I'm an idiot, or, if my hair looks weird, or whatever it is people worry about when they're sitting across the table from each other. When you can absorb something when you're just sitting at your desk by yourself, the difference is pretty vast.
Oh my gosh, yes. Well, I think that's a great place to end things. Tiffany, where can we find out more about you and DocuPlayer?
I'm on LinkedIn, and pretty easy to find there, Tiffany Christianson. And the DocuPlayer website is just DocuPlayer.com. And if any listeners have any questions, they're welcome to email me directly, and it's Tiffany, Tiffany, @DocuPlayer.com.
Excellent. Thanks so much, Tiffany.
All right, thank you.
Thanks so much for listening. You can find more info on us and get your free white paper on client service at 5starcouncil.com. You can get in touch with me at john@5starcouncil.com. If you enjoyed the podcast, please subscribe wherever fine podcasts are found and leave us a review wherever you can.